Okay. I'd like to call this Committee of the Whole meeting to order, and sorry for our bit of tardiness. Confirmation of agenda. Is there any additions or deletions today? Any disclosure of pecuniary interest, general nature thereof? Seeing none, the adoption of minutes.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Wells, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole held on October 8th, 2020 of the 7th Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of South Dundas be adopted as circulated.
All heard the motion. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So today we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 discussion items, mainly dealing with building. So I'll turn the meeting over to Nicole and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. First item up for discussion is the planning fees. So over the past few years, municipality of South Dundas has seen an increase in planning applications. I just cut out there. Hello? I can't hear anything.
Can you hear us? No?
There, now I can hear Lloyd, yeah. So I'm not sure what happened there. So our current planning fees haven't been updated for approximately 4 years, and most of the fees that we have don't encompass all of the planning applications. So currently we have committee of adjustment, zoning bylaw amendment, site plan control, and applications for consent. The other applications that we don't currently have fees for are similar to part lot control, subdivision agreements, site plan control. Sorry, we do have site plan control, but any amendments to anything? So before you have a draft proposal for fees. Aaron from JL Richards and I have gone through the past applications and considered neighboring planning departments to see what kind of fee schedules they're on. And these are the ones that we're proposing to introduce. The majority of the introduced fees are currently on the tax base, so we want to take those fees off the tax base and charge them directly to the site-specific applications. If you have any questions, we can answer them at any time.
Okay. Any comments, questions, concerns? Deputy Mayor Gardner.
When you compared the fees, you mentioned you compared them to surrounding municipalities. Now are we at the same? Are we above in any categories? Or
No, so the
more?
proposed fees are actually lower than the neighboring municipalities. We're just kind of on par as
Okay.
an average.
Yeah, I just
We're
want-
not above anyone.
Yeah, okay, we just still need to be competitive for, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Lewis.
Nicole, I understand that that there has been no charge on some of these applications, but the ones that we have had charges on, how much of a percentage have they gone up? Like, for instance, Committee of Adjustment, have they gone up to very much of a percentage?
So for instance, the current Committee of Adjustment application fee is $100, and there's a requirement for a $250 deposit. So we're proposing that the application is $500 application to cover staff time, and then any additional fees would be incurred onto the applicant. So if we have to put it in the newspaper for public notice, any mail out, stuff like that, that would be an additional cost
Okay,
that they would have to pay afterwards.
okay, thank you.
Councilor Mellon.
My questions were sort of answered over there, but I have one more, just out of curiosity. You have plus any additional fees. Are you going to be charging on an hourly basis? And I think that I have no problem with that. I mean, you can't. Everyone's going to be a little bit different, but as long as we make it clear to the applicant at the start of the process, you know what the I guess the hourly rate will be, and you know that there will be an hourly rate on top of, I guess make it clear what they're going to get for their $500 for committee adjustment, plus any additional fees, like what that could be, just so that, you know, somebody don't come in and scream, oh, I gotta, an extra $500 bill or something, you know. That would be my only comment.
Yeah, so what we do with, similar to committee adjustment, we send out a detailed invoice of what the actual charges are. So it would include the application cost, the deposit, and then, so committee of adjustment is paid on a $75 per hour basis for each member of the committee. So our committee has 3 members. It would be $75 times 3 for that at an additional cost deducted from the original deposit. So they do receive the invoice in detail, and there's no other staff hourly charges. This is just if there's an outside consultant, we need a peer review for engineering or something like that for site plan control, then we have that additional to charge back if we need to.
Supplemental, if you will, that's fine, it'll be on the invoice, it's a lot, but if we can make it known to them at the start of the process too, so they don't come back and, you know, say, oh, I didn't know I was gonna charge, I could be charged, like you say, 75 times 3 is 225. You know, my math is good.
Yeah, normally when we get an application for minor variance, Aaron and myself both give them a rough estimate on what the previous applications have cost. And it's really different depending on which type of application it is, but minor variances typically run between $1,200 to $1,500. So they would have a rough estimate on the amount, but just not the definite charges.
Councilor Wells?
Yeah, most of my questions have been answered. The only one more question I have is, like you were saying about this, like advertising a zoning amendment or something in the papers comes out with tax dollars. Does the neighboring municipalities or townships, is theirs paid by taxation, like the advertising part and whatever other stuff is, or is it off taxation as well as what we're going to do or try to do here?
No, so typically anything that's site-specific planning applications get charged back to that applicant. Unfortunately, our fees and charges haven't included that in the past. That's why we're bringing forward the update.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I agree with the update. I think, you know, those who have specific requirements from the municipality have to pay for those specific requirements because it is to their benefit solely. The only thing I would comment that you could, if you're going to put the clause about additional fees at the bottom, that should at least include the potential for fees from the counties, because on a severance they have a significant fee, and anything else that they have to deal with, official plan amendment, at least then it's upfront, and people will say, oh, the counties might cost money there too. So I would make that in addition to the consultant review and the other stuff you have there. So other than
Yeah,
that,
we can
I don't have any issue with it. It's not so much about being competitive as making sure that our costs are made up, because these can cost significant dollars in staff time. So anything further on that? Okay, so you can bring that forward to a council meeting for approval then, please. Next one deals with short-term rentals and accommodations, which was a request that council had at one of our last committee of the whole meetings. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As Mr. Mayor has alluded, we did discuss short-term rentals at the October 8th Committee of the Whole. This will include Airbnbs in licensing requirements. So under the discussion, we do have some proposed inclusions for licensing, as well as an attachment from Erin from JL Richards. She did a zoning report. We just want to make sure that before we draft a bylaw that council is on board with what we're proposing for licensing and the requirements under the zoning bylaw, because it is a public process that we have to follow. We can answer any questions at any time.
Okay, we'll start with Council Wells.
I went through it. I have no issues with it. I think we had a good discussion about it. I don't see anything that has to be changed, but I think it's good myself.
Right.
It covers basically pretty much everything we talked about, that the few loopholes that there were in that, so no, I'm good, Mayor.
Okay, Councilor Mellon?
For these, if you will, the short-term rentals, like, well, I guess, are they for only in-house, like, in the main dwelling of the person renting out the space? It wouldn't be for laneway suites or trailers? Like, you know, somebody put a trailer in their yard and in the backyard and rent that out, or is it just be in the main house?
So this would include all suites on the property. So for a laneway suite, they would have to be permitted under the zone to have that on the property. So agricultural use would be permitted to have that. Residential use would not. So we do have different definitions under that we're proposing for the zoning change. And for instance, one would be a homeowner occupied where they're renting out a room in their existing dwelling. Another one would be a separate unit altogether on the property, where it's just like a trailer or a separate suite from the existing house.
Okay. The reason I was asking, like, you know, instead of having absentee ownership, I guess, if you owners, you know, they just rent the place out, you know, I like to think, and if there's any violation of this bylaw or provincial law, is there? I didn't see it in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we should be able to revoke that license if there's, you know, substantiated proof that, you know, the bylaw has been broken, or they've broken provincial law because of party house, if you will, that, you know, we have some way to revoke that license immediately upon, you know, it can't be an accusation. It has to be, I guess, if you will, a proven, you know, it can't be just a complaint because somebody don't like it, but, you know, a legitimate concern that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll bring in an enforcement clause under the official bylaw. So a draft bylaw will come to council. We just wanted to make sure that general provisions are kind of discussed before we do that. It would be covered under the Provincial Offences Act if we ever had to go to court, but we could remove licensing at any time if we needed to.
I personally think that would, you know, probably solve a lot of ongoing issues. You're going to probably still have the initial one maybe, but I read in there too that if it's on private well, that water would have to be tested, and the septic would have to be inspected under the building code, section 8 or whatever, to be able to handle, you know, going from 2 residents in a home to 8 or whatever, you know, if you rented out 3 rooms or whatever. That's in there too.
Yeah, exactly. So any modifications plumbing wise on a private septic system do have to be reviewed, just to make sure that the current septic system does accommodate what they're proposing. And we do have a clause in there that we're proposing to have potable water and sufficient plumbing facilities for each of these units. So you can't just go and pitch a tent without any running water or outhouse or whatever they're proposing.
Okay, I think that's all for right now, Mayor Byvells.
Councilor Lewis?
I read the report, Danielle, and it's a very good report. I do believe that you have accomplished everything that council asked for you to do, and the question that I had was already answered. My colleague, Councilor Mellon, asked it, so thank you.
Mayor Gardner?
So I got caught up a little bit. I think the proposal is reasonable, but you included the Niagara on the Lake, or Niagara, as a comparison. I'm trying to find it. There it is. And in their short-term rentals, they include bed and breakfast. So what would this bylaw mean for our bed and breakfast folks?
So in Aaron's report, we're actually proposing not to include bed and breakfast because it's already defined under a zoning bylaw.
Okay.
So that's a separate zoning classification, and they have to have a specific set of requirements to be able to meet that.
Okay.
That's why we're not asking for them to be licensed under this
Okay.
proposed bylaw.
So it's kind of interesting because Niagara on the Lake has a ton of bed and breakfasts and a ton of Airbnbs, and they're grouping them together, whereas we have few of each, and we're putting in different tiers for this. So that's kind of interesting in the sense that I wouldn't want to penalize the B&Bs. In the sense, I don't want to penalize the Airbnbs either, but if the rules are more stringent for a B&B when they might only have 3 bedrooms. Like I've known bed and breakfast in Morseburg that have only had 2 or 3 bedrooms. And so they would be elevated to have more expectations more than this, than say Kirsten Gardner has 2 bedrooms that I'm going to offer up. And I'm just concerned about that. It doesn't seem fair.
No, so the bed and breakfasts under the zoning classification don't have elevated requirements. It's under the building code where the requirements come into effect if you have over a certain number of bedrooms.
Okay,
So for instance, one of the ones on First Street has up to 10 occupants, right? So there's significant fire requirements that they need to maintain for those occupants in the buildings. But for this, the Airbnbs, it's more of a licensing requirement, so we can control basically an annual inspection to make sure that the grounds are up to code. There's not a lot of requirements for those grounds, but
yeah. And I understand that, like for safety purposes, I totally understand that. I guess I'm just looking at the example provided where it includes bed and breakfast, and you're saying it's under the fire codes in Ontario. They would be under the same mandate as we would be, so I'm just wondering why they didn't separate the two.
I think probably because of the sheer amount that they have.
Yeah, I spoke to the planner at Niagara on the Lake, and they have close to 8, I think, different types of short-term rentals. They are very specific as to which type of short-term rental, and then each type of short-term rental is permitted in a different zone. So we're being a little bit more permissive in terms of the zones that the short-term rentals can be permitted in, and we're not having as many classes of short-term rentals compared to Niagara on the Lake.
Okay.
I don't think there's any intent of us interfering with the current B&Bs because they have as Nicole said, they have their own regulations to deal with under the building code. The Airbnbs had 0 behind them, and this is our attempt to regulate them in a fair way that through a licensing effort that they are more up to snuff than just an ordinary house because of the strangers that are in that dwelling.
And I understand it. I think what's proposed is very reasonable. What I somewhat got hung up on was the example provided.
Fair enough. I think you had to kind of divide it a bit. Aaron, you want to go on and discuss about zoning? The only thing that I from my reading of the proposed licensing arrangement we're going to have for Airbnbs, and it's rather ironic. It's going to be they may not want to come to us, but they're easy to find because we can just go find them on the internet and say, oh, you're in South Dundas, and where's your license and everything else. I think it is for the protection of visitors that do come to South Dundas to make sure that they're run up the code. The necessity of a fence may come into it because sometimes the new people coming in won't know where the boundary lines are, and sometimes they're not really defined. There's no fence, there's no boundary in somebody's backyard. I know that there's a current situation in South Dundas where an Airbnb and the neighboring property are in a legal dispute over where the line is and who should put up the fence and everything else. So sometimes just putting it into our bylaw fixes the problem that in theory should never happen, but it does. And I know good fences make good neighbors. I farm for a living. I know that in the old days, if you didn't have a fence and your livestock got out, it was on you and everybody knew about you. So anyway, you can talk about the zoning and what's proposed to change in there, and then we can go from there.
Sure. So when it comes to short-term rentals, municipalities are doing a balance between the zoning and the licensing when it comes to regulating the short-term rentals. We're able to do more with the licensing side than we can with the zoning side. So with zoning, we're just proposing that we put a definition defining what short-term rental is, maximum of 4 rooms, occupancy period for a maximum of 30 consecutive days, needs to have a municipal license, and then the items that it doesn't include, like a bed and breakfast, tourist lodging establishment, other kind of short-term accommodations that wouldn't be in somebody's home, basically. We're also we're also proposing that they be subject to having 1 parking space per short-term rental room, per guest room in a unit. So if there's 4 guest rooms, they would need 4 parking spaces for that accommodation. And then other than that, we are proposing that they're subject to site plan control and then any of our other provisions for the zone in which the short-term rental is in. So if it's in an R1 zone, they'd be subject to all of the R1 provisions. Some municipalities are putting in general provision sections specific to short-term rentals. So we're seeing more provisions such as density. In Prince Edward County, they have a limit to the amount of short-term rentals in a specific radius. We're also seeing amenity spaces that need to be required, landscaping. So those are things that we can consider putting in a general provision section, such as fencing, like you suggested. Those are different things we can do, but as of right now, we're just proposing having a clear definition for short-term rental, 1 parking space per each guest room, and then being subject to the zoning provisions for that zone.
And you're allowing them in all residential type zones, like residential, rural, ag, etc., not commercial?
Yeah, any zone that a residential use is permitted.
Okay.
So, for example, even in an institutional zone, we can have an accessory use. We can have a detached dwelling as an accessory use to an institutional zone. So technically it'd be permitted in that accessory structure.
Okay. I guess question, Nicole, maybe to you, Aaron. What about we do allow mobile trailers in the ag zone as an accessory for farm use. Would that be allowed as a short-term rental also, or is that kind of skirting the line then?
I believe it would be permitted as a short-term rental.
Okay, but we could still regulate and license it.
Yes.
Okay.
If it's going to be used for short-term rental, it needs to go through the licensing process. That's what Nicole and I are proposing.
Okay. Then I think we have a good start here. I'm sure that, we'll go through it, the process, and it will be public anyway. And if there's any issues with those who do own short-term rentals, they can speak to us, and then we can go from there. Anything further from council at this time? Okay, then you can bring the draft to council, and we'll go from there. Thank you. Next one is additional dwelling units, and that I know has been on the provincial radar and is really heavily in one of the new bills that they have passed. So, Aaron, you go ahead.
Yep. So in 2019, the Planning Act was amended as a result of Bill 108, which is the More Homes, More Choices Act. And this amended to permit additional residential units, So as per the Planning Act, you are permitted to have 2 residential units in a detached, semi-detached, and row house. So this means that you have your primary use and your additional residential unit in a single detached, semi-detached, or row dwelling. In addition to that, you can also have a residential unit in an accessory structure. So what this basically means is you could potentially have up to 3 different units on one lot. 2 in the primary dwelling and 1 in an accessory structure. And it's only on lots with a single detached, semi-detached, and a row house. The Ontario Regulation 299-19 is the implementing requirements for this amendment to the Planning Act. In this regulation, they basically provide that you need to have 1 parking space per additional residential unit. and that the additional residential units be occupied by any person. So you don't have to be related to the individual that owns the property or anything. It's open to anyone to be able to rent these accommodations. And then also that official plan and zoning bylaws be updated to meet the Planning Act. I have spoken to the county, and their official plan, they believe, is general enough to not have to be amended. So we're just focusing on the zoning bylaw. There are some things that I've outlined in my report, areas of concern, things that are not touched upon in the Planning Act or in the Ontario regulation. So these include legal and non-complying lots, the overloading of existing septic beds, because it doesn't mention if there needs to be separate lines for each unit. There really isn't anything on that. Setbacks from water bodies and water courses, increased density for lakes or are at or near capacity, the building height and setbacks, unit design, site plan control, and then consistency with the built form and character. Currently in the municipal zoning bylaw, we have provisions for accessory apartments. There's a definition, and then there are specific provisions in the general provisions section, and this use is permitted in the residential first density and the residential hamlet zones. These provisions in the accessory apartment no longer meets the Planning Act. So moving forward, it's recommended that accessory apartments are completely removed from the zoning bylaw, the definition, the provisions, and removing it from the specific zone that it's permitted in. It's recommended that moving forward, we add a specific definition for additional residential units that meets the Planning Act and the Ontario regulations, also creating provisions for the additional residential units. A couple things I want to note to make sure that we do align with the Planning Act is that these are permitted in any zone that a single detached, semi-detached, and row house is permitted in. So provided that we provide the proper, we update the zoning bylaw to have a clear definition and provisions for it, we don't have to include it as a permitted use in each zone. So now I turn it back to you guys for any questions.
Okay, so before I turn it over to council, you have this list of areas of concern. Mm-hmm. If council or you recommended that we at least incorporate some of these areas of concern to make sure that they're taken care of before we go down this road, is that something the province is going to allow us to do, or is this something that they may not like? Like I'm looking at well, the whole list, actually, there are concerns with it, the overloading existing septic beds, the setbacks, the water bodies and water courses, and, even setbacks from another house or another lot, the lot lines, especially in town. I don't really want those issues to raise their head after somebody starts. I think that's something we can maybe be a little proactive on.
Definitely, we are able to include provisions in the zoning bylaw to mitigate these impacts. Just speaking between myself and some of my colleagues at JL Richards, because obviously this is of concern for a lot of municipalities, and a lot of municipalities are updating their zoning bylaws. So suggestions that we have in terms of septic, if the lot is receiving municipal services, then there are, I believe you guys should have a bylaw with regards to connections. I believe, yeah, yes, Nicole, I see your head nodding. So but more so in the rural areas where they're on private services, if it's in the primary dwelling, they'd likely be using the same line as the primary dwelling and then being fed into the various parts of the house. We can include provisions for ensuring that there's sufficient capacity and supply of water and sufficient capacity of the septic done by a qualified person, have that as a provision, but we're unable to say you can't have it, basically, because it is permitted under the Planning Act. Oh, go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, so the septic system issue will be covered by the building code. All of these additional units will require a building permit, and any building on a private septic system does initiate a review on our party.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're able to.
One of the other issues is the proximity between buildings is Building code also addresses that under the type of construction you can use, dependent on the distance between the buildings on the properties.
Also with setbacks, again, if it's in the primary dwelling, it would already be subject to those setbacks. And then even in the accessory structure, there are setbacks in the zoning bylaw that are already there. So they would just be subject to the setbacks and provisions that are already required for each zone. Coming back to the servicing, we can include a provision in the general provisions section stating that they need to have adequate supply of water subject to building code, something like that. We're able to include some items in the general provisions.
Okay.
With regards to building height and setbacks, that's again more for the accessory structure. So if you have a garage on your lot that you now are also having an accessory structure, whether that be on an above story or something, there are height limits. We can include a separate height provision for accessory structures with an additional residential unit. That's something that we can consider if council would like us to.
Okay, well, anyway, there's food for thoughts. I'll go through council and see where they go. Deputy Mayor Gardner.
My questions were around the septic bed issue, and I think that's been answered. I think with this, I think that it may be useful for folks that maybe have the space and want to put a granny flat in for aging parents or whatever. I think that's probably what's triggered some of this discussion. But no, mine was about the septic bed and whether or not our bylaw covered it, and sounds like it does. So.
Okay. Yeah, because you're an example of
Yeah.
private service plus
Yeah.
your own service,
Yeah.
or public service plus public water, private septic. So.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you could get in the weeds if you have a dwelling like mine where I say I give up a bathroom. I have 3 full bathrooms and showers and stuff. If I gave up a bathroom, and not that I would do this, but decide to have my dad move in the back, you know, that type of thing. But yeah, it's been answered.
I guess I'll leave it to the experts to answer that question. I mean, I'm going to try that one. Go ahead, Councilor Lewis.
So there is provisions you can accommodate switching out plumbing facilities for another area on the property, but there's fixture unit count that's calculated in the septic overall load capacity. So in general, it'll be covered, but you are able to do that technically. It's switch out one for one.
It won't happen, but thanks.
That's when you just cover it, you put a false floor all over the connections, you inspect and then take the floor out, put everything back
Oh,
in.
geez.
Okay. Don't say it doesn't happen. Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, my one question was on septic and also water, because a lot of wells in the rural area are hand dug. So we better make sure that there is sufficient amount of water for another dwelling. Because I know whenever I was a kid, lived at home, our well was something like 20 feet deep and it was hand dug. So just food for
Yeah, so
thought.
that would be covered under the Well Act. There's a provincial act for wells itself, but it would be considered when we do the building permit. They do have to maintain the potable water on the property for that unit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Mellon, you don't have to worry about septic this time. We
Yeah.
got that one covered for you.
Yeah, I got the septic covered, thank you, and the water's covered pretty well. I guess I'm really into the trailers today, but would trailers be listed as an additional dwelling unit? Like a mobile home or a camper, you know? They're not insulated very well. God help you in January and February, most of them anyways.
No, so even though we're including a provisions for additional dwelling units, it still has to meet the building code. So it has to be conventional construction or manufactured in a factory that is approved to do so. And there is minimum room sizes required under the building code, so most people that want to do a tiny home can't officially do a tiny home. They have to meet the minimum size requirements.
Okay. Thank you. That sort of covers that. You've already touched on the setbacks as far as property line and whatnot, lot coverage area on a small lot. Would that be covered under our existing bylaws or whatever? Like, because I'm just thinking in the towns, like, the rural portion, not everybody has a big lot, but I mean, lot coverage, would that come into play? Like the amount of area that can be covered under, and the setbacks is, you've already touched on that.
Yep, lot coverage is already established in the zoning bylaw, I believe in every zone, although I don't have it in front of me right now. There's a maximum lot coverage in most zones.
Okay, so an additional unit can be a standalone structure or an addition onto an existing house, right? Plus, if you want to renovate a part of your existing house, so that would be the 2 units. That would be
Correct.
allowed,
Correct,
besides the main unit, okay. Okay, well, yeah, the lot lines the lot line too, and any, we just had the presentation on, the LiDAR and the floodplain mapping area. If any areas are gonna be in a floodplain for these accessory units or an environmentally insensitive area, how is that picked up?
So the properties are already classified as floodplain or floodplain adjacent, or if they're adjacent to a mineral aggregate quarry. So those provisions are already in our zoning bylaw. Any additions to those properties would either require environmental impact studies or floodplain setbacks. It's really dependent on the site specific.
Okay, it's already,
units.
I think that's it for me.
Councilor Wells?
Yes, most of my questions were answered. The one the mayor had about the Ontario policy not interfering with ours if we go through all this work and then we're not allowed to do it. So, and the other one was about the floodplain, because I went through that quite a few years ago, rebuilding a house, and I had the same square footage, but instead of 2-story, I made a footprint with a bungalow, and there was like 2 months of I had to stop work and that, and there had to be engineer come in and do all this stuff. So it's basically a lot of this hasn't changed as far as if you're building addition. All the like South Nation comes into plan with all this stuff, and so it's not straightforward, but it's I think with what you bring back to us, what you've been talking about, Nicole, it should be pretty easy to get through this. So, thank you.
Okay, and I understand where the province is coming from because of the lack of housing, especially in our larger cities, and costs. I think that was its main drive. However, it will impact every municipality, including ours. I think our biggest concern is to make sure it still seems to work with the flavor of our municipality, and we don't have a hodgepodge of units in everybody's second backyard saying that they can do this, which they can, but I think we need to be reasonable in how we have additional dwellings on there. So make sure they're done right and within the flavor of the villages that they're going to be in. If they're in a village or if in a rural area, then it probably can be a little bit more lax because in most areas, not all. So, anything else from council on this? Okay, you guys good on that? No more questions? Okay. Property standards bylaw. This will take a little bit more longer than the last 5, 2, 3.
So as council remembers, we did have a discussion on a draft property standards bylaw on September 24th at Committee of the Whole. It was a very rough draft on our property standards, and we did send it out for public feedback in an online survey. We received some fairly valid concerns, and I've kind of outlined some of those concerns on page 2 of the report. One being a shipping container provision, barbed wire fencing, so the agricultural community it is impacted significantly on that, as obviously it contains some of their animals. We had some concerns about outhouses, vacant buildings, and lighting maintenance. So what we wanted to do is come back to council and get your opinion basically on how we want to move forward. So in 2018, the province removed the provision from enforcing. So basically, the municipalities have an option to either draft a property standards bylaw or to enforce the Residential Tenancies Act maintenance standards. Basically, what that does is ensures owners and tenants are kept accountable for those properties, but it doesn't encompass any of the other properties within the municipality. So if there's no property standards bylaw, the only thing we can enforce is tenancies basically on private owned properties. So if you have any questions, I can answer them at any time. I did mention some of the enforcement requirements. So the idea of the property standards bylaw is not to attack people on their private properties. We want to make sure that everyone, property owners, tenants, and the public are kept safe. There's no ill intent here. We just want to make sure that we can ensure the rules are followed and we're not stepping out of line, basically. So I'll pass it on to council.
Okay, Nicole, before we go on, within your report, the draft South Dundas bylaw, is that exactly the same you brought before, or has it been amended to some changes?
No, so the draft is exactly the same as before, just for a discussion topic. I did provide a copy of the residential tenancies maintenance standards, just so you can see the difference between the two. So a lot of the provisions under the property standards draft are requirement by the province. They're not kind of just made up information, I guess. It actually, if you go back and read our town of Morrisburg and Village of Iroquois property standards bylaw, it's almost word for word. We just updated it to the current times because that was back in the 70s and 80s.
Okay, well, I'm going to pass it first over to Councillor Wells, who wasn't at our first discussion, I don't believe. And
No, I wasn't.
I'm sure that he has
I got a few questions.
a few questions and concerns over this. Go ahead.
I'm going to start on, it would be section 6.2, where on vacant buildings and that, vacant or unoccupied, my question, would that include, like, as far as boarding up? Because I can tell you 20 places right now, top of my head, that this should go to. Question is, like, would that also include like an agricultural building that's out in the middle of the field that has a big open door that someone can go in? That would have to be, because it doesn't really say like where any building now vacant or unoccupied. So I don't know whether an ag building should be included, because you drive around, there's lots of barns that like are back off the road like 300-400 feet. Houses can be back. I'm just wondering if that's something that should be added. That was just one of my questions. Then moving forward to section 8.2 and 8.3. States like for fire damaged buildings. And my question there was, and we went through this, I think, before, Nicole, the property over here on 5th Street, where we're saying here it has to be cleaned up within 30 days. Does the insurance companies override the municipality when it comes to that? Because, like right now, there's a property in Williamsburg that's the Grazer house that burnt 6 months ago now, and it's still piled up, even though it's half fenced. Does this section, say if the homeowner, like we can enforce it, but the homeowner doesn't have the money to get rid of it because the insurance hasn't settled up. So it would be, like, I don't know how that's going to come in play as far as this bylaw here being drafted. So and there's just another, like, do we treat every different, like every case different, Nicole, like when it comes to that? Like, can you modify it yourself, like if they're waiting for insurance, or do we have to stick by this? And it's just something, because I know it would come up that if we went back there, it's been 30 days and that homeowner doesn't have the money to actually have someone clean it up and wait for the insurance money, does the municipality pay for it, then get her money back? It's a question that I think will come up. So moving on with that. Oh, go ahead. Oh,
If I could just answer those two questions before I get sidetracked here.
okay.
So vacant buildings, so farm buildings are less accessible to the public. So if there's a valid concern where it's affecting a neighboring property, or if there's significant life safety issues, we would definitely go forward and request that it's demolished. The vacant buildings are more within the town limits, I guess. So there's one just north of us that's obviously visible and been like that for quite some time. If it's accessible to any of the public and it's a danger to society, basically, these provisions are actually under the Building Code Act. We can go after the property owner to either remedy the buildings or demolish. It's just the amount of time put into that and the legal constraints we have to follow. It is time consuming and costs so much to the tax base. So we try to not go that route. For the fire damage, the insurance does not have jurisdiction. So we do have property standards requirements on the one that you're mentioning right now. So because it's kind of a sensitive topic, similar to the one south of us where the gentleman passed away on the property, we kind of go site by site basis and kind of include some sympathy. But we have to make sure that everyone's safe. So if there's no construction fence, or for instance, Williamsburg, the wall at the front was about to fall onto the sidewalk, we definitely interacted with the owner to get that rectified immediately. But municipality does have the right to go in, remove the building, remedy the site back to original state, and charge back to their taxes.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Moving on, just so this is not really much, just in 11.2, draft is spelt in the British version instead of the Canadian version. But anyways, moving forward to, where am I now? 23.3.
The shipping containers.
Yeah, the shipping containers. Now, is this, and like you said, I've had a lot of people call me about this too. Now, is this part is just going to pertain to like villages and hamlets and that, not to rural residents? Or is it right
Yeah.
across the board?
So one of my notes is maybe consider either removing that clause altogether or restricting the shipping containers to a certain type of use. So industrial use, commercial use, depending on the property, it would be okay. If it's actually a low human occupancy, where, for instance, in Morrisburg, we have an applicant that requested a shipping container as a garage. So he can actually do that under the building code, but he has to get an engineer to sign off on the structure, basically, because it's considered a building. So there are options in doing that. It's just some of the neighboring municipalities remove the requirement for shipping containers altogether. Others don't even allow them in. North Dundas doesn't allow shipping containers anywhere. So it's more of introducing it into our requirements rather than kind of leaving it out in left field. Like right now, they're popping up everywhere and we have no way of enforcing them.
I just think it's be a tricky thing. Like rural, I can't see if someone has 5 acres of land and wants to use it for storage, like municipality shouldn't be able to tell them, well, no, you can't have that. In town, if someone put a 40-yard container in between 2 houses, well, that's a little different than where a smaller container that you can actually put a cladding on it after, and like you said, have an engineer sign off on it. It just becomes a dwelling, really. It doesn't matter whether it's steel walls or it's wood walls. So that's something I think we should maybe just put a little more detail into that. I don't think removing it is the answer, but just a little more clarification on it, the way I see it. Okay, 27.2. Okay, in 27.2, clearing of all buildings and structures and debris, where you would have the clear say on something that doesn't exceed 20,000, and if it does, you would have to come to us. Personally, myself, and this will be the council's flavor too, whether they want, I think that should be reduced down to 10,000, because $10,000 you can do, if you take a hi-ho and a dump truck, you can do a lot of clearing. And where I just think it should be us involved, or like more people involved once you get up to that 20,000, because you'll be tearing down, you can tear down a lot of stuff with $20,000 worth of hi-ho and truck. So that was just one thing, and that's just my opinion. We'll see once it goes through council if anyone else had the concern about that. So moving on to 30.2. This here, Property Standards Committee, that, which obviously we don't have right now, is just like I don't know if that is a good thing or a bad thing. I think the committee should be the present council. That's as far as I think it should go. Because I just think that opens a can of worms if you, something this delicate, dealing with someone's property, and like someone's junk is someone else's treasure. I'm feeling there's going to be a lot of stuff come back to us anyways, through appeals and other stuff where we have to make the decision anyways. And I just think, and again, this is my opinion, we'll go around the table about having a committee. I think the committee actually should be the council that makes that final decision, because this is a pretty sensitive bylaw that we're going to sign off on, if we do. 31.1. Here, this, now, it's saying here with, this is under the building code, so maybe the right to enter and inspect. I think we should actually have permission first on this. And if entry is denied, then come back with like an officer of law or something. I just don't think we should go there and without a warrant or whatever and say, okay, we're coming in. This is we're just coming in. I think we should, first of all, I'm sure prior to getting to this point, there would be, you would send letters or there'd be calls or blah, blah, blah and all that. But at the end, I still think if it's denied, that we should, for the inspectors and everything, protection, have someone go there, like have the municipality pay for a police officer to be with you. That's was another concern of mine. So I think 31.9. No, other than that, everything else I seen looks fairly good. I think it's fair to the residents. I know if this goes through, there's going to be a lot of work for you guys driving around here to just as far as vacant properties, which is a big concern. Like I drive by, there's several ones that people can walk right in, the doors are open, which should actually be shut. Like, no one's ever been hurt yet that we know of, and we had it there back here, and when we had coffee with council, and one resident here in Morrisburg, how many people were really upset about that residence, that house. And this would give us the power to go and say, okay, it has to be done. So it's just something like that I think the public would really like, so. I think I'm pretty much done for now till it goes around the table.
Okay, well, fair enough.
Okay.
They were fair, valid concerns. Any comments on Councillor Wells's concerns, or?
Yeah, so there's just two of the last questions you had. One was for the committee. So the committee can be comprised of council members. So even if we didn't go the committee route, what we do is try and deal with the property standards owner, the person that got the order. And if we can't, then it comes to council anyway. So we already have that process. It's just if we move forward with a committee, it's basically like a committee of adjustments for minor variances. So if we have a property that's non-compliant and they want to appeal, they could go to the committee for overruling of the staff. So that would be bylaw and property standards. So the right to enter is actually under the building code. We do respect people's privacy and we do try and communicate with them before we have to enter. For residential dwellings, if you're living on the property, you can absolutely deny entry. So that's your right as a human being. If it's a commercial industrial property, you can say you deny entry, but we actually have the authority to go on the property if we wish. We try not to go that route because nobody wants it to get shot at, basically.
That's good to know. I got a lot of commercial stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. If there is a concern for staff safety, we do contact the OPP for assistance, and most cases we do have the fire department to help us out on the ones that we do enter with authorization.
Okay, good to know, Nicole.
Yeah.
The monetary figure, 20,000 versus 10? Any
Yeah, I'm
comment?
comfortable with whatever council wants to do there. I don't disagree. You can do a lot for 20 grand. I just want to make sure that there's a point to the file. If we get to that point and we have to demolish, I want to know where council wants us to be at.
Okay. Councillor Mellon?
We're on somewhat on the same page, Councillor Wells. I won't have to talk too much. I agree with the committee. It should be made up of, to me, council members. The storage, the shipping containers, I think should be permitted in rural ag zones, the hamlets and towns and villages. I don't think I don't think they should be allowed there. It's just going to cause a lot of, I think, issues. But as far as out in the farm, community, they're used extensively for storage and whatnot under the Farming Act or under regular normal farming practices. There was one section, and I'll try and find it, and I do agree with that 30 days on the fire also. It seems to be, even the fire over town here last winter, it took a long time to get cleaned up. It might be because of insurance issues and, no money to get it done. And I appreciate the fact that you sort of look at that on a case-by-case basis. There was one in here, 16.1, that I had circled. The heating system shall be installed that is capable of supplying their normal hours copy. Where is it there? Be automatic in functionality without the requirement of human intervention. When I read that, I thought, well, if I got a wood stove, that's human intervention. So do we need to clarify that a little bit more? Like, wood fireplaces, wood stoves are permissible. Because if you,
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we can clarify. So, where that comes from is if it's an apartment where someone's renting out and the thermostat's locked, so the tenant can't actually modify their thermostat. So we would have to make sure that heating is kept at an acceptable level throughout the cold winter months, so they're not frozen out, basically. But we could definitely clarify that section for sure.
okay, yeah, I think that might be a good idea. Also, as far as maintaining fences, I haven't got the section here. Is that just sort of, are we talking the rural section, the ag sections here, you know, as far as making sure that your fences are, I mean, do we not still have a fence tribunal or fence review, you know, for the farmers? But like, like fencing as far as industrial or commercial or whatever, where it's required, and I don't know where that section is. I should have wrote down what section it was in, but to the fencing, are you looking at fencing, especially where fencing, you know, ag fields may join up to somebody's residential backyard sort of thing? You know, is there any provision in there, you know, as to, you know, somebody say, well, you know, you haven't got your fence good enough and your cow's eating over my lilac bush or something, you know?
So yeah, that's definitely something that we have to clarify also is the fencing maintenance requirements are more geared to towns, villages, hamlets. So where it's affecting a neighbor's property, it definitely becomes an issue. Out in the agricultural community, it's not so much. But we do see even just north of Morrisburg there, a lot of the fences are falling down or are not maintained. So we want to have a provision somewhere in our municipal bylaws that allows us to make sure that they're kept safe and maintained. Currently, we have no fence provisions at all in South Dundas.
Other than the fence review, I guess, if you will. And not just the.
That's more a boundary thing than it
Yeah,
is
that's
how
more
pretty
about-
the
yeah.
fence looks, so.
That's my fence and your
Yeah.
fence sort of thing.
That's right.
I haven't got a problem with, if I got a pasture field bordering up on somebody's house and the fence is falling down and my cows are in tromping over his yard. I don't have have a problem with, you know, maintaining the fence. We may have an issue as to who's actually gonna be responsible for that section of fence, I guess, I don't know. You know, but yeah, I have no issues with that. It's just, especially when there's cattle involved, but there's very, very little pasturing going on out there. We did have an issue, I guess 4 years ago or so up by Iroquois where there was sheep, I believe it was, or something, and we had to step in because there was no fencing whatsoever, and township was involved, and that's a whole other ball game, but yeah.
Section 20, if you were looking at
Thank you.
it. It's on 13, page 56 is
Yeah.
where the specific
Mayor
page of our
Lloyd.
package is.
Yeah, okay. Good repairs for accident hazard, okay. Yeah. Anything else? I think most of them. Right now, I think that's it, Mayor Bybels. A lot has been sort of gone over here, because, and you did say North Dundas doesn't allow shipping containers at all?
That's correct, yeah. They have it in their zoning provisions. They do not permit shipping containers at all.
Not even in their ag sector?
I'm sure there's some in there that
Okay.
haven't been enforced, but
They better not go out and look too well in North Dundas, I think.
no, they don't.
Yeah, okay, I was surprised when you said that. Okay, I didn't, but that's,
Yeah, I did work in North Dundas a couple years ago, and that was definitely one of the hot topics we had.
okay. I have no problem with them. I think they should be permitted out on ag zone land or under a farming, an ongoing farming operation. I don't think they should be just stuck anywhere and, you know, haphazardly, and I can see basically in town, like Mr. Wells has already alluded to, it could be an issue if they're not dealt with right. That's all for now, Mayor Bybels. I'll skim through my notes, and I think it's going to be covered.
Okay. Yeah.
Had something to say, Mayor. I think the clerk wants to say something.
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, Councillor Mellon, you're correct. The Livestock Act would take in effect to look at and bring in the fence viewers if there was an ag dispute between fence lines, and they do tell you what kind of fence to put up. You are correct.
That hasn't been too bad, much an issue since the former mayor's sons have gotten out of the cattle business out here.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Clerk.
Okay, Council Lewis.
Most of my questions were answered, but I have to agree with my colleagues across the way on these containers. They might look good in a farmer's field or ag, whatever. They are definitely an eyesore in town, especially. I've seen some at the east end of Morrisburg, and they're pretty sick looking. I do believe, that we should maybe be looking at a fencing bylaw. I know a couple of years I had a complaint from a resident in the rural area where his neighbor was going to put up a fence made out of wood pallets, and we had no jurisdiction to say anything about what the fence was made of. And I do agree with my colleague Councillor Wells on the fire. I think $10,000, you can do a pile of work on $10,000 for cleanup. And sometimes it seems to take forever to get these buildings that have burnt cleaned up. I know, as my colleague Councillor Mellon said, it took forever to get the one here in Morrisburg cleaned up, and the one in Williamsburg is not looking much better. There was another one in my head, but it has kind of left me for now. If it comes back, I'll get back to you on it.
Mayor Gardner.
Thanks, Mayor Byvelds. Good discussion, good points on the other side of the table. Couple of questions though. If we did pop-up shops in South Dundas made out of shipping containers, how does this impact that whole scenario?
Good question. So pop-up shops, those include people walking into the shipping containers, correct?
No. So it would just
No,
be
they don't?
it would just be the vendor, and hopefully almost like a stall idea where, I mean, they may walk into it, I don't know, but yeah, it'd be similar to the ones in Cornwall.
Okay, so based on the conversation that you had previously, was that at a council meeting, I believe?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so what I understood was the size of it wouldn't require anything under the building code. The shipping container requirement would be either in the zoning provisions or a property standards bylaw. But we're talking about a shipping container for permanent use, not for temporary event use.
Okay, so even
So
though
I don't think it would affect us.
it doesn't affect us, okay. With the feedback that we got, I noticed you highlighted five things. What was your overall feeling with the feedback? Was there more education that needs to be done as to why we're doing this process, or is there, because I understand, I mean, anyone looks at any law, if it's got teeth to it and you look at it and take it personally, you're going to go, oh my goodness, my rights are taken away. But I think the whole point of this exercise is so that you can deal with some of the long-standing issues that many of our residents have brought forward numerous times, and we haven't really been able to action some of them. So what was your feeling with the feedback? Is there a few more things that need to be done as far as communicating why and how, or Yeah,
I think for sure we have to try and educate the public on why a property standards bylaw would be beneficial to the municipality. We did see an overabundance of vicious comments, if you want to call them that, but outside of that, there were some valid concerns and people took it seriously, and that's where I brought those into my report. We definitely want to educate them and make sure they're not feeling unsafe on their own properties. So we're not trying to trespass or invade privacy, anything like that. We just want to make sure that the problem areas are addressed and not just for the occupants on those properties, but for people passing and the public around there.
Because that is the scenario nightmare where you sit there and you're at home and you get a knock on the door and the mean bylaw person's gonna force their way in and go through all your stuff and it's just gonna be nasty. So while it's hard to get that negative, harsh feedback, I think it may be just an indicator of a little bit more communication, messaging, that type of thing. I think that, like I said, while you read it, you go, this person said this, and how can they say that? You're highly educated on this stuff. Generally, Joe Blow on the street, this document is seen as a privacy restriction. They don't see it necessarily as a safety, being able to deal with some of the hazards that we have in the municipality. So I would just caution, and I know this, I can tell, but just don't be afraid to take that feedback as hard as it was, and maybe just look and see maybe we need a little bit more communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with the building department, like we're seen as the bad guys, right? Like
Yep.
we're the bad news bears. So it's more of an education aspect, and people aren't sure why those rules are in place, and they're there for a reason. Like something drastic would have had to have happened at some point in history in Ontario for these rules to be in place. So if we can educate the public on that, then absolutely. And our doors are, and my phone's always on. If anyone has any questions regarding that, and if they feel that we're attacking them in any way, I absolutely bring it forward and we'll discuss it.
My comments a little less than about the department and more about just enforcement in general.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding, and sometimes that's why we have enforcement weeks and all these fun things for education. Education goes a long way, and also educating people about their rights of refusal. I think that is an important conversation as well. So I get it, and I get why you need some teeth, because I heard loud and clear that there's long-standing properties that are dangerous, especially the ones in town, that need to be dealt with. And I'm all for the tools, but I think education's a tool as well. So, and it'll make your job a little easier if people understand, and then you won't be the bad news bears or whatever, as you say. So, yeah, I get it.
Thank you.
Done?
Yep.
Okay. They're still the bad news bears because they're the building department. Can't fix that problem. That'll never change. I'm sorry.
You can move it a little
No,
bit.
it's okay.
It
come to
hasn't
terms
been
with it.
too bad lately. I have had minimal complaints. That's the way I would look at it. I don't know. I'm challenged with this whole thing because I know council thinks, well, we can enforce the rules the way you want to, but once you put it down on a piece of paper and someone comes up with a complaint and says, enforce your rule, you made it, fix it. And you go back and say, well, it's not that bad. No, it says in there, these are the specifics, thou shalt do that. So I find this very encompassing. I understand from in rental units that you have to have things like this because there are some landlords, and I'm not going to paint every one of them, but some landlords that don't do their job, and it's going to cost them money to fix it, so they're going to let it go, and then the tenant starts getting used to it, and then he saved himself some money. But if every standard here applies to every building in South Dundas, every building pretty well in South Dundas will find something wrong with it that has any age on it, not maybe even a brand new one. But I mean, it sets us up for some challenges, I think. By sounds of council, they're willing to give this a try. I personally think it's going to be it's going to set us up for failure because it's so fussy. I know we have to deal with the Residential Tenancy Act. We could just dealt with that and just dealt with those buildings. However, we still need to deal with the privately owned buildings. And yes, there are privately owned buildings that are hazardous and somewhat unsightly. but, there's a section in here that I pointed out, and it was, it'll be 3.7. And it talks about good construction practice and ensuring the components repaired that can perform its intended function and finishing the repair in a manner reasonably compatible with the adjoining finishing materials. Well, who's to say, who's going to judge that? Like, somebody can say, well, I like my purple door, but the next guy doesn't like the purple door you put in. Like, I'm picking it apart, but somebody's going to pick it apart, so be ready for that. Someone's going to say, I was in this guy's house and he's got all these issues, go fix it for me. And then what are you going to do? Like, I see issues. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't know where to fix it, because I think we're just trying to be the end all and be all, say, well, we can fix it if someone complains or if there becomes an issue. Heating system, 22 degrees Celsius. The Ontario rule is 20, so why are we at 22? I can guarantee you there's going to be landlords saying 20 is good enough because 22 is going to cost me 10% more in fuel. So those same things. I live in a house that says 20 and a half, so as you get older, it'll creep to 22 then. I will guarantee you that. What else did I write down here? Oh, I'm going. I like the lighting provision, because that outdoor lighting can interfere with other people. So as I said, there's good and there's bad. And I've heard it on the street, the most common thing I heard was throw this thing out and restart. That was a common thing. And I said I had to agree with them. But I don't know where else to go. We need to have some standards fully understood, but we need a whole department just to do this. We can run it for a year, and then say, okay, what do we need to fix it? But it's going to be hard. There's good and bad. I won't disagree. And as for the committee, I will caution council on wanting to be on this committee, because right now we do have some expertise around the room on buildings and property and stuff like that. But if you get a council that does not have expertise, how are they going to do it? They better damn well find the experts to do it, because it's going to be a challenge for them not to know, what one person thinks that something has to be built doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. So, but you could have people on a committee that have the background to do that know buildings, know how to do it right, and then still be reasonable in applying these rules. But anyway, go on.
I just have a question. So it's going to sound silly, but whenever I read this, I am reading it from a problematic, how do we solve some of the long-standing issues in South Dundas scenario. Is there any way we can create a document with the rules for vacant buildings and rented buildings? Like, why do we have to blanket everybody with this if our issue really is in the vacant buildings and the ones that are owned by, like, rented out?
But there are some privately owned buildings that you need to apply some standards to.
Perhaps, but our big list right now seems to be on rentals and vacant. Because things can be changed, right? Like if the whole point is to give Nicole and her department some tools to check some things off the list, like we heard at Coffee with Council, then why would we not target those areas without doing this blanket thing? Because I have heard, yeah.
Okay,
You go first.
okay. I agree with Mayor Byveld, and I was just adding what I seen in it. Myself, it's going to be hard to, and I like what the Deputy Mayor Gartner said about vacant properties. This blanket's a whole, like right down to the door color, or if you want to use pine or oak trim or whatever. This here, I'm in agreement with the mayor as far like this is just basically a draft right now, but as we go down, we definitely, I still think we need something for vacant property that's causing issues. As far as people living in there, well, we already have something in where it was a couple months ago in a council meeting where someone here in town that they were made to clean up their yard or something. But to apply this whole thing, I don't know if what's going to we could be setting ourselves up for something, or we could be set and say, you know what, but I think it's a little too aggressive, but I think we should come up with something for property that's owned by people, even in the commercial part, like there's a couple and businesses that are shut down here that we would make sure they're shut down fine, but they would have to be up to standards as far as like you can't have open doors in them and stuff like that. But as far as it's more like the vacant property there's in town, and there's lots out in the rural area that you drive and there's openings there where kids could go in and the building could fall down or whatever. I think we should have something there, but again, it'll be hey, Nicole?
Okay, Nicole.
All right, so just to give you an idea, half of our frequent flyers are private owned properties that refuse to comply with any standards. 1/3 of it is about tenants, and the other third is vacant buildings. Sorry, quarter and a quarter. My fractions are off today. But we do see a lot of issues with privately owned properties that refuse to clean up, refuse to maintain any kind of safe environment on their property, regardless of the distance between them and the neighboring property. So this is in the hamlets, this is out in rural areas. It's all over the place. And without a property standards bylaw, the only thing that we can enforce is for the tenants themselves. So if we want, we can go and do separate bylaws for different types of buildings, but yeah, and I guess that's really a judgment on council's requirement. This is trying to address everything in one, and I don't disagree. It is very technical and detailed. But the reason for that is we're trying to make sure staff have an avenue of enforcing everything under one scope, not just a tenant or a vacant building or privately owned property that refuses to comply. We're trying to do everything under one without coming back to council multiple times.
And for your benefit, Councillor Wells, and you weren't here the last time, we did have a lawyer from Alton Alt talk about why you would do this, and it would just give better teeth to what we need to do what we're doing. Right now, we have nothing. So that was our advice at that time. I'm not trying to override and just giving you information.
Yeah. And maybe 2 or 3 bylaws. I think it'll be better than having just this one for now, because we can amend a bylaw or whatever. But I still agree, like, if we put this in, well, we might be setting ourselves up that you might want to know what a gunshot sounds like. Whatever. But anyways, not saying that it's going to go there, but I'm for something, but I'm just not 100% sure. But it would definitely be a smaller package than what I see in front of me. So that's it, Mayor.
Right, Councillor Mellon.
I gotta somewhat agree with what you're implying, Mayor Bybels. And I think what you're gonna see is, and I've already seen it and experienced it, I guess, and heard about it out in the rural portion of the municipalities with the housing markets the way they go. And then there's a lot of, if you will, urban city folks that are coming out into the rural section, buying houses and whatnot. And unfortunately, what has been, an ongoing home, business, farm, whatever, for years, all of a sudden somebody's gonna, move in down the road, or, we're gonna get a lot of complaints on this, I think. You're gonna get a lot of people that are say, oh, well, that's not what I wanna look at. And we're gonna be busy and we're gonna run our staff off the ground, and, I got thinking when you were saying you could put in, at the discretion of staff, but then that leaves too much of a gray area in there, and it's going to be coming back to, and for council, if however we do the property standard committee, we're going to get probably a lot of work. Somebody is, but it'd be nice. We got to have something. I do agree. We got to have something. I think this one's just a little too. Takes a little bit too broad a swing, maybe. We're covering everything. And it's going to. There's going to be those out there that are going to be going through this, and if they don't like the look of their neighbor's property, we're going to give them the tools to complain about it.
So here's a thought I just wrote down. I think we want to do something. I don't think this council is just going to throw this out and say, don't do anything. So if we have property standards, start out with a section general for all. So that means what looks on the outside, some of the safety issues that can happen on private property, people enter them, fences, lighting, is the one that has, that talks about lighting that could interfere with others, and we're going to talk about the sign. So someone puts up a sign or a heavy duty halogen or LED light that's shining the wrong direction, it can be dealt with. And then have a section for private dwellings that is specific to them, so you don't deal with if they don't have the heat on, or if, stuff that it's up to the person's right to do whatever he wants within his own walls, as long as he or she feels comfortable and allows other people in and is still comfortable with the insurance on that. And then have one for tenanted dwellings. So tenanted dwellings are very specific. You need to have the provisions of the Residential Tenancy Act section so you can apply them, because we need to apply them rules. We know of issues in tenanted areas that we have landlords that are from away, I'll say, they're, and they hope everything goes well. As long as a check comes in, they don't really care. And then we do have landlords that are good landlords and want to make sure that their property is kept up to snuff, and are the opposite. So I suspect you don't need to see them too often, but there are ones that we do. So if we have that kind of bylaw, at least then it's workable both ways, I think. I think that would, it's something that at least it's enforceable too, because you got to remember, once you put it on a piece of paper, you can say you can use your own discretion, but I've had too many people come up and say, enforce your rules. And if they say that's what the rule says, we can all think of one person in South Dundas that is extremely picky about what a rule says, you won't have a choice. If the requirement says it's supposed to be this, and you say, well, we can live with that. No, you can't. That's what it says. So that's your challenge. You're supposed to be going in a 50 kilometer zone, 50 kilometers an hour. Yeah, there's leeway, but technically, if you're 1 kilometer over, you can get a ticket.
Exactly.
And I'll warn you right now, if you're in the city of Ottawa and you see a sign saying about the speed limit monitors are up, you better make sure you're not going past that limit, because you're going to get one, because why wouldn't you? So I think if you make it that way, I think I could live with it. I think that the residents in South Dundas can live with it, and it was something that you would enact for a couple of years. You wouldn't throw it away the first year, because first year you're always going to have that jiggling problem. But in 2 years' time, you'll know if this is something that works for South Dundas, or you're going to have to modify it. I think, does that sound reasonable?
Absolutely, yeah. So I wrote down the same thing that you wrote down. So basically general provisions overall, and then schedules for different types. So vacant properties, tenant properties, agricultural, rural. So that's definitely something staff will work on and bring back as another draft for council to review.
Okay. Any other comments from council? Go ahead, Councilor Wells.
Yeah, I would just like the main things, what I get calls about, and I have a picture on my phone, it was just sent to me by a resident. It's more about property standards, not so much the house, just the property, meaning what's on the property, not the dwelling itself type thing. Like if someone has 50 garbage bags out there and it's starting to stink, well, someone's got to intervene and get stuff, like, it's got to be done. Something like that. As far as when you come back to us, as far as the dwelling goes, like Mayor Byville says, well, if they're comfortable with the heat at 15 in their house, well, who are we to say, no, it's got to be at 20 or whatever. So if I feel if you bring something back to me as far as the properties, residential properties are vacant and stuff like that, and cleanliness, where a lot of people, 95% of people want, if I lived beside someone that had a half a scrapyard and I was trying to sell my home,